My name is Alex. A year ago, I thought my life was an almost perfect picture. A beautiful house in the suburbs, a stable job at an IT company, and a wife I adored. Laura has always been the personification of calmness and tenderness for me. We've been together since college, grew up in the same city, and went through a lot of hardships. So if someone would have told me back then that she was capable of cheating, I would have just laughed. However, perfect pictures tend to crack. Our life started to change when Laura decided to start her own business. She had always dreamed of opening a flower shop, and as soon as we saved enough money, I supported her. She worked day and night, finding new customers, organizing events. I saw her inspiration and was even proud of her. But over time, we spent less and less time together. She would often come home late, explaining that she had eternal things to do. At first, I didn't attach much importance to it. All businessmen go through a difficult period, I thought. But one evening changed everything. Laura said she was going to an exhibition in another city for the weekend. It seemed like nothing suspicious, but her behavior that morning alerted me. She was restless, checked her phone several times, and even forgot about the cup of coffee she always drank before leaving. That evening, I decided to check her laptop. I was embarrassed. I had never invaded her personal space before. But my inner "something's not right here" was nagging at me. I found the correspondence in her email. The sender's name was Jason. At first it looked innocent. "Thank you for helping me decorate the hall. You're amazing, Laura. Your taste is impeccable." But the further I read, the more the text turned into something completely different. "I can't wait for our weekend. I booked us a room with a lake view. It's going to be unforgettable." It hit me like a cold waterfall. Laura was seeing someone behind my back. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call her and tell her everything, but I held back. Instead, I decided to act quietly. Over the weekend, I went to the hotel mentioned in the correspondence. And although I was prepared for the worst, what I saw shattered me even more. Laura was there with Jason, but it wasn't just an affair. They were discussing something that concerned me directly. "Alex has no idea," Laura said, laughing. "He's always so naive. Are you sure he'll sign the documents?" Jason asked. "He will sign it. Alex always trusts me." Documents? What did they talk about? I couldn't listen anymore. That night I went home and decided I was going to take action. I ordered an audit of Laura's finances, found a private detective, and started collecting evidence. Step by step, the truth was revealed to me. It turned out that Jason was not just a casual acquaintance. He was the lawyer Laura had hired to prepare the documents for the sale of our house. She planned to move with him to a new state, taking most of our savings with her. But the biggest shock was that Jason was not who he said he was. He had been involved in fraudulent schemes in the past, and now he was using Laura as a tool for another crime. I gathered all the evidence and filed for divorce. But before that happened, I did something that ruined their plans forever. I found a way to contact Laura's business partners, to whom she owed a large sum of money. I revealed to them her connection to Jason and his fraudulent past. This caused a real storm. Laura was summoned to court. Her business was closed, and Jason disappeared, leaving her alone. Now I live alone, far from the city where it all happened. And although this experience was painful, it taught me the most important thing. Never turn a blind eye to the little things, because it is they that most often lead to the truth. A few months have passed since I left everything behind. Living in a small town was a real salvation for me. Here I found the peace that I needed so much. The house I rented stood on a hill overlooking the river. Morning walks became my new ritual, and interacting with the locals reminded me that life could be simpler and more honest. But peace is not always final. One morning I received a letter. An ordinary white envelope was lying on the porch. There was no sender's address. I opened it, and in my hands was a note with a few words. "Do you think it's over, Alex? I'll see you again." My heart clenched. The letter was signed with a name I never expected to see again. Jason. I sat for a long time looking at these few lines. Why now? I thought everything was in the past. The police assured me that Jason would not be a threat after all the revelations. But now it seemed that I was wrong. I decided to go to the local police station. The officers listened to my story with interest, but could not do anything concrete. The letter did not contain any obvious threats, and Jason was still missing. That night I could not sleep. Every sound outside the window made me shudder. Was it just a way to scare me, or was it something worse? A few days later, the thing I feared the most happened. When I returned home after a walk, the door was open. I had no doubt that someone was inside. I took a metal bar from the garage and, holding my breath, entered the house. Everything looked familiar. No signs of a break-in, no mess. But there was another note on my desk in my office. "This is just the beginning." I decided I couldn't stay here any longer. The next day I started packing. Moving was the only way out for me. I didn't even know where I was going. But I wanted to leave this place. But the past caught up with me again. In the parking lot in front of my new house, I saw a man. He was standing by his car, watching me closely. It was him, Jason. "You've ruined everything, Alex," he said as I came closer. "But you don't know what I can do." I realized that there would be no conversation with him. I immediately called the police, and Jason disappeared as quickly as he appeared. This time I decided not to wait. I filed an official application, hired a lawyer, and did everything I could to protect myself. Life hasn't gotten any easier, but now I've learned to be prepared for any eventuality. Years passed. Jason hasn't appeared again, and I hope that was his last manifestation. But sometimes at night I still hear distant sounds, like someone's footsteps. And although I want to believe it's just the wind, part of me will always be ready for the next chapter of this story. Time passed, and I tried to return my life to normal. After everything I had been through, I found a job in another city, leaving the past behind. A new beginning seemed possible, but the memories wouldn't let go. Even as the days became easier, the nights were still full of fears and suspicions. One day, when I was returning home from work, my phone rang. The number was unknown. I tried to ignore it, but the call repeated over and over again. Eventually, I answered it. "Alex?" a familiar voice said. It was Jason's voice. "I want to explain everything," he said. "It's not what you think." I almost hung up, but something made me keep listening. "Everything that happened was for your sake. I was trying to protect you even though you don't realize it." The words sounded so strange that I could not understand whether it was sincerity or just another game. "You ruined my life?" I replied, holding the phone tightly as if it might explode at any moment. "Leave me alone. I just wanted you to know," he said quietly, "that this didn't start with me. Sarah. She always knew how it would end." These words were like a bolt from the blue. I did not know how to react. Was it a manipulation, or perhaps a part of the truth that I did not understand? I hung up and didn't answer the phone anymore. But at night, as I sat in my small apartment, I thought about what he had said. If Sarah knew more than I suspected, then maybe the whole story was much more complicated than it seemed. The next morning I decided to find answers. I went back to the old notes, to the photos we took together. And there, among the memories, I found something I hadn't noticed before. A small notebook that Sarah had left in our closet. The pages were filled with notes that seemed innocent, but then they became more and more strange. One entry stood apart from the others. He won't know until it's too late. Jason will help me, but only for his own sake. My heart stopped. It was not only a betrayal, but a conspiracy. Sarah and Jason were playing their game together. But to what end? Now things were even more confusing. Jason knew more than I suspected. But could I trust him? And was Sarah as dangerous as she seemed? I decided that I had to find out the truth to the end, even if it meant returning to the shadows of the past. I decided to get to the bottom of this story, even if it meant plunging back into the darkness I had hoped to leave behind. My first step was to find Jason. His call had been unexpected, but now it was the key to the puzzle. I called the same number he called from. He answered almost instantly. "I knew you'd change your mind," Jason said. His voice was a mixture of confidence and caution. "Do you want to explain?" "Okay. Where can we meet?" I said, keeping my emotions under control. We agreed to meet in a small coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. The place seemed neutral, but I still felt tense. When I walked in, Jason was already waiting. He didn't look as confident as he had during our last meeting. "I'm glad you came," he said when I sat down across from him. "Speak," I replied briefly. He held his breath and started. "It all started before you even met Sarah. She was not what she seemed. I knew her from university, and even then she was manipulating people. She approached people who could be used. And I was one of them." His confession made me tense up even more. "Then why did you become her accomplice?" I asked, trying to understand his motives. "She promised that everything would change if we did it together. But she always kept everything under control. Sarah knew how to make you trust her and me depend on her." I tried to process his words, but they only raised more questions. What did she want? What were you trying to achieve? Jason sighed and looked directly at me. "At first she wanted your money. She planned to take everything and leave you. But then something changed. She became afraid of you." "To be afraid of me?" I asked in surprise. "She said that you would start digging deeper, that you might find out things that you shouldn't know." I didn't understand what she was talking about, but it scared her. His words became another mystery. Was Sarah afraid of me? What exactly could I find out? I decided that the next step was to find someone who knew her better than I did. I remembered her friend Laura, with whom she often talked. We were never close, but maybe Laura knew more than I thought. I found her through social media and wrote her a message asking to meet. She agreed almost immediately. "I've been waiting for you to contact me for a long time," Laura said during our meeting. "Were you waiting? Why?" She looked at me as if she didn't know where to start. "Sarah, she's not who she says she is, and I think you've already realized that." She started telling me a story that made me go cold. Sarah had a complicated past that she had never talked about. Her family was involved in illegal activities, and she herself used others to stay afloat. But the worst part was that Laura mentioned a man who, in her words, was a real threat. Sarah had allegedly once worked with him, but then betrayed him. "He's been looking for her for years," Laura said. "And if you're involved in this, you better be careful." I could feel the puzzles starting to come together. Sarah had run away from her old story, but now that past was coming back. And I, without realizing it, had become part of her game. The next day I returned to my new home, but I felt as if I was being watched. Nothing seemed safe. The phone rang again. This time, the screen showed a name I hadn't expected to see. Sarah. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, not believing my eyes. Sarah. She'd been missing for weeks, and now she was calling as if nothing had happened. My fingers trembled as I answered. "Hello," I said, trying to hide my emotions. "Hi." Her voice sounded calm, even carefree as it had before. "We need to talk. You need to explain." "And immediately," I replied. "Not now and not over the phone. It's too dangerous. I need to meet you in person." "Is it dangerous? What are you talking about, Sarah?" I asked, although inside I already realized that her fear was real. "Just trust me. You want to know the truth, don't you?" I hesitated but finally agreed. We agreed to meet at an old motel outside of town. The place was isolated, but that was obviously what she wanted. The motel looked even worse than I had imagined. Broken signs, cracked walls, and an almost empty parking lot. Sarah was sitting in the corner of the motel's cafe, wearing a dark coat and large sunglasses. She looked nothing like I remembered her. "You came," she said when I sat down across from her. "Now it's your turn to explain," I replied. She took off her glasses, and I saw a bruise under her eye. "What happened?" I was shocked. "It's a long story," she replied. "But the bottom line is that I made a mistake, and that mistake is now haunting us both." She said that the man Laura mentioned was not just the past. He was someone who had become a real threat. His name was Victor, and he was not only her former partner, but also the one she betrayed to save herself. "I took something from Victor," she explained. "Something that is very important to him, and now he's looking for me to return it." "What exactly did you take?" Sarah looked at me with despair. "I took the money, a lot of money, and now I don't know what to do." I felt anger and frustration boiling inside me. "You dragged me into your chaos. You lied to me all this time." "I know," she whispered. "But I didn't know who else to turn to. You're the only person I've ever trusted." Her words made me think. Despite everything that had happened, part of me still wanted to help her. "What now?" I asked. "I have a plan," she replied. "But I can't do it alone." Her plan was to return the money to Victor, but to do so in a way that he could not get it. She wanted to use me as an intermediary. "And you think I'm just going to go along with it?" I asked. "I know it's a big ask," she said. "But if you don't help, we'll both be in danger." I didn't know if I could trust her, but at that moment, I realized only one thing. If I didn't help, this story could end very badly for both of us. I sat there looking at her, trying to put all the pieces of this madness together. My life had already been turned upside down, and now she wanted me to be part of her dangerous plan? But the truth was I was already involved. "Okay," I finally said. "Tell me what needs to be done." Sarah breathed out a sigh of relief, as if her shoulders were a little lighter. "Tomorrow evening we will meet with Victor. But this is not a normal meeting. We need to act quickly and very carefully. And you think he's just going to take the money and leave us alone?" "I have nothing to hope for but this," she replied, looking down at the cup of coffee in front of her. The next evening we waited in an abandoned parking lot. The place was perfect for dark deeds. No cameras, almost no witnesses. Sarah looked tense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a trap. The car's headlights illuminated us, and a man got out of the car. He was tall, stocky, with cold eyes that seemed to pierce through. It was Victor. Sarah, he said, his voice sounding dangerously soft. I was beginning to think you'd decided to run away. I came to give you back what is yours, she said, trembling. She threw the bag of cash at his feet. Victor was in no hurry to check it. Instead, he looked at her and then turned his gaze to me. And who is this? He asked. No one. He just helped me get here, she answered quickly. Then why does he look like he's about to do something? His gaze bore into me. My hands were clenched into fists, but I was silent. Victor bent down to open the bag, but suddenly something changed. His face tensed and his eyes filled with rage. What is this? He took a handful of empty paper bags out of his bag. What? Sarah looked as surprised as he was. There was money, I swear. Victor frowned and took a step toward her. Have you decided to play with me, Sarah? No. It wasn't me. His hand grabbed her shoulder. But I did something I didn't expect even from myself. Let her go. I rushed forward, but Victor was too fast. He pushed me away like I was an insect and pulled a gun out of his pocket. Do you know what I do to those who betray me? At the same moment, I heard the sound of sirens. The police. They were close. Sarah suddenly grabbed my hand and pulled me back. We have to go. Without thinking, I ran after her. Victor was shouting something behind me, but I couldn't understand the words. We got to the car and escaped seconds before the place was overrun by police. Sarah didn't say anything on the way back. I was silent too, trying to understand what had happened. Was the money fake? I finally asked. No, she answered. But someone replaced them, and I don't know who did it. I couldn't tell if she was lying or if she was just as stunned as I was. But one thing was clear. This story was far from over. The next few days passed in tense silence. Sarah avoided direct conversations, and I couldn't shake the feeling that one of us was hiding something. Sometimes I would catch her doing strange things, leaving the room to take a call or looking out the window as if she was expecting someone. I felt like we were caught in something that was not easy to get out of. And the worst part was that I didn't know if I could trust her anymore. One evening I decided to talk. Sarah, what really happened to the money? I asked, trying to sound calm. She froze for a moment, but then sighed deeply. I don't know. I really don't. I put them in my bag, and everything was there until I left it in the car, she said, looking at me as if she expected me to accuse her of lying. Do you think someone could have replaced the money while you were out of the car? I don't know, Brian, she exclaimed. I don't know who I can trust. These words stuck in my head. Maybe I shouldn't have trusted her either. The next day, I decided to conduct my own investigation. I went to the place where Victor and I had met and looked around. There was nothing suspicious there, except for one thing: a small surveillance camera that someone had hidden in a nearby bush. I took the camera off and brought it home. What is it? Sarah asked when she saw me put it on the table. These are the answers, I said. I connected the camera to my laptop and started watching the recording. The video showed us arriving at the meeting, but the most interesting thing started earlier. The recording showed the moment when Sarah was getting out of the car, leaving the bag with the money. Someone came up to the car, opened the door, and replaced the money with counterfeit bills. And this someone was, "It's you," I whispered, not believing my eyes. Sarah was on the video. She replaced the money herself. She looked at the screen, her face pale. "It's not what you think," she began. "Then what is this? Did you set me up?" "I wanted to protect you," she exclaimed. I stepped back a step, trying to realize what I had heard. To protect me? You dragged me into this, and now you want to say it was for my sake." Sarah burst into tears. "Victor, he said that if I didn't find a way to pay back the debt, he would find you. I couldn't let that happen." It sounded like the truth, but I still couldn't fully believe it. "What happens next, Sarah? Do you think he's just going to let us go after this?" She was silent. That evening I decided that I could not stay in this chaos any longer. I packed my things, left a note, and left. The last thing I did was to go to the police. I couldn't let it go on any longer. A few days later, I found out that Sarah had been arrested. It turned out that she was deeper involved in Victor's affairs than I could have imagined. And me? I was finally able to get back to my life, putting it all behind me. Sometimes the worst thing about cheating is not the fact of it, but the realization of how little you really knew about the person next to you. The days after Sarah's arrest stretched on like an endless ribbon of time. Although I had escaped from her clutches, the feeling of relief was mixed with bitterness. For a long time I tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. It seemed that every detail of our past now had a hidden meaning, a hidden lie. I was summoned to the police for additional testimony. The interrogating officer was quite reserved, but one detail caught his interest. "You said you found the camera at the meeting place. Are you sure no one left it there specifically for you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I thought about it. Indeed, the camera seemed too conveniently found. But who could have left it? And why? After the interrogation, I returned home and decided to reread the note I had left Sarah before I left. It was nothing special, just a few words. "I can't take it anymore. Goodbye. ***, but when I took the note out of my jacket pocket, my fingers felt something extra, a small piece of paper that I hadn't noticed before. It was a letter, Sarah's handwriting, a short message that left me in a stupor. "You think it's over, but this is just the beginning." My heart was pounding. What did she mean? Could she have planned something even after her arrest? That same evening, I started receiving strange calls from an unknown number. When I answered, there was silence on the other end. I blocked the number, but the next day the calls repeated. And that was just the beginning. Someone was following me. I noticed unfamiliar cars near my house, felt stares when I walked the streets. Then a package arrived. It was left on the doorstep with no return address. Inside was a copy of my passport, old photos of me and Sarah, and one photo I had never seen before. In the photo, I was sitting in a cafe, and behind me was a man I did not recognize. Under the photo was a caption, "He's still watching." I could no longer ignore these events. I decided to meet with the detective who was investigating Sarah's case. But before I could leave, the doorbell rang. A man in a strict suit stood on the doorstep. He looked as if he had stepped out of an advertising brochure, well-groomed with a perfect smile, but his eyes were cold as steel. "Mr. Bryan," he said, extending his hand, "I am someone you would not want to meet, but unfortunately we have business together." His words sounded like a sentence. "Who are you?" I asked. "Call me James. And before we begin, let me assure you that what you thought was true is only half the truth. Now come on, we have a lot to discuss." I had no choice. James invited me into the car, and we went somewhere I had never been before. His calm demeanor and strict manners made me feel like a pawn on a chessboard. But I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I needed answers. We drove in silence, and only when I was beginning to lose patience did James speak. "What happened to your wife was no accident." His voice was even, but there was a cold calculation in it. "It's part of a much bigger game than you could ever imagine. I don't understand what you're talking about, I replied, trying to remain calm, but my insides were boiling with questions. James smiled, and his smile was subtle but very ominous. You don't have to understand. You are just a small part of a bigger scheme. Your wife was used, and not just to destroy your family. I didn't know what to say. His words sounded like a nightmare, like part of a movie, but more and more I began to realize that it was real. The Sarah I loved may never have been who I thought she was. We have to get to one place, James said when I still couldn't figure out what was going on. You'll get answers there. We stopped at an old house on the outskirts of the city. It looked abandoned and neglected. James got out of the car without another word and headed for the door. I followed him, trying not to show my concern. Questions were still swirling around in my head, but I didn't have time to doubt. Now I was in the middle of it all. The house was dark, and when we entered, I felt like I was in a worse nightmare. The old walls, the dim light that barely broke through the dusty windows. James stopped at a large table with a few papers and a photo on it. This is all you need to know, he said, showing me the photo. I recognized Sarah in it, but there was someone else with her. A man I hadn't seen before, but he looked familiar. This is not what you expect, James said. This man is not just her lover. He's part of a larger scheme, and your wife was just a piece in that game. I looked up, but James was no longer in his seat. He had gone into the other room. I could feel my insides shrinking with fear. This day became even more confusing and scary. Meanwhile, I looked back at the photographs that were unfolding in front of me. It was like a puzzle that was being put together very carefully. And then I realized, what I thought was a betrayal was no accident. Sarah was involved in something much worse. And then I heard a noise behind me. I turned around, but it was too late. The man from the photo was standing on the doorstep. You came here for answers, he said, looking me straight in the eye. And you will get them. But those answers could change everything you know about yourself and about Sarah. That day I learned more than I could have ever imagined. And I realized that sometimes it is better not to know the whole truth. At that moment, I didn't know if I wanted to know more. Everything I had experienced and everything I had learned had already turned my life upside down. I wasn't ready to meet the man in the photo. I wasn't ready to hear the truth. But that man, named Thomas, was standing in front of me, and I couldn't avoid what was about to happen. Do you think it was all just an accident? He asked coldly. Do you think your wife cheated on you with some random man? No. Your wife was part of a big game we've been playing for a long time. I could not believe my ears. How could she be part of something like this? Sarah. My Sarah, who had always been so supportive and always seemed so honest and loyal, was now part of a conspiracy. I was filled with fear and frustration. My whole understanding of the world, my whole perception of people was crumbling before my eyes. Your wife didn't betray you for pleasure or out of weakness, Thomas continued, stepping closer. She was playing her part in a grand scheme, and you have no idea what the cost of that game was. I clenched my fists. I couldn't and didn't want to believe him, but I saw something in his eyes that made me doubt. My head was filled with conflicting thoughts. On the one hand, I wanted to tell him to shut up, that it was just a story, but something inside me told me he was telling the truth. Yes, your wife was not just a victim, he continued. She was in the game, and what you think of as a betrayal is actually part of a larger operation that we were running long before you even met her. I didn't know what to do. I stood in front of him, feeling devastated, with all my feelings and memories crumbling under my feet, and nothing left of the perfect picture I had painted in my head. Thomas took several documents out of his bag and put them on the table. "Here are the documents you need to understand what we're talking about," he said. "Your wife was just a piece on the chessboard. And now that you know everything, the choice is yours. You can join us, or you can leave everything as it is and live in the dark, not knowing the truth." I didn't go to the documents right away. My heart was beating faster than usual. I was scared of the offer, but even more afraid of the unknown. What if it was all true? What if I don't know who Sarah really was? I was scared to even think about it. I walked over to the desk and leaned over the documents. The letters and photographs in front of me involuntarily made me feel the ground crack under my feet. The documents contained information about deals I could not imagine. Some kind of secret organization manipulating people's lives, corruption schemes, using the people they used as mere tools to achieve their goals. And it seems that Sarah was one of them. "If you want the information you need, it's all here," Thomas said, shaking his head. "And I won't explain anything else to you. It's your choice." Thomas gathered his things and, leaving me alone with the documents, quietly left the room. I was left alone, trying to process all the information I had just received. And then I realized that my choice was not as simple as it seemed. It was not just a betrayal. It was something much worse. I went to the window. Moonlight illuminated the room, and my thoughts were more confused than ever before. On the one hand, I felt betrayed, but on the other hand, I began to realize that nothing in this world is as it seems at first glance. The choice I had to make was a difficult one. But one thing I realized for sure was that my life would never be the same again. And although I was at a crossroads, I knew that my role in this game was no longer so simple. Now I had to act. Several hours passed before I could tear myself away from the documents. My hands still held the letters, but my thoughts drifted away. Sarah. None of this made sense. Now that I was looking at all this material, it all made sense, but none of it felt right. My wife was part of something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. And I wasn't even ready to understand the scope of this game. Thomas disappeared. No, he didn't just disappear. He left me with a choice that I didn't trust at all. His words gnawed at me like a pack of wild dogs. "The choice is yours," I repeated in my head, trying to make sense of it. And then I realized that with these documents I would not return to my normal life. This was not about simple betrayal. It was more than just a lie. It was a plan that was not limited to my relationship with Sarah. It was about an entire system that I probably fell into without realizing it. I could not simply dismiss this evidence. Over the next few days, I took a number of actions. I contacted several people to confirm at least some of the information in the documents. It was not easy. The people I talked to were silent and cautious, not knowing who I was or what I was trying to find out. Apparently, they were also involved in these games. But I had no time to hesitate. I came to the conclusion that I needed a plan, and I made one. That was the moment when I realized that it was no longer possible to simply get out of this situation as a victim. I needed something more, and I finally decided it was time to talk to Sarah. She was not waiting for me at home when I returned. It was not typical. Usually we always knew each other. She knew where I was and I knew where she was. But this time it was different. Her phone was off. And when I came home, I saw that she had left her things. But there was no note. And then I felt that something important was about to happen. I decided to go to her office. And this is where things got even more confusing. As soon as I approached her workplace, I saw a familiar face.
Lisa.
She was there at the entrance. I had never met her before, but her look and expression told me everything. She was part of this plan. And this moment was not accidental. "You're here for a reason," she said, coming up to me. Her voice was calm, but there was something in it that made me feel like a stranger in this world. She said I would have to accept reality as it was. The real story, the one I was about to learn, was completely different than I had imagined. "Sarah is not just your wife. She's a key part of the same game as Thomas," Lisa explained, and I felt the ground shake beneath my feet again. I was not ready for this, but it probably couldn't have ended any other way. Now I could not be the same as I was before. I was standing here, and this was only the beginning of what was to come. Lisa paused, giving me time to process what I had just heard. I stood in front of her, trying to remember when it all started. When things had gotten out of hand. My hand clenched into a fist, and my heart beat faster. She knew more than I did, and that was ironic. All these years I thought I was in control of my life, but in reality I was just a pawn in their game. "You have a choice," Lisa said, as if there was something so mundane about it all. "But I think you've already realized that it's not what you imagined. You were never in the center of it all." My thoughts were confused. I couldn't agree with what Lisa was saying, but everything pointed to the fact that her words had some truth to them. The question in my mind was, why didn't Sarah tell me anything? Why didn't she warn me? And why didn't Thomas just disappear? They were all part of something bigger. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to control my emotional tension. Lisa looked at me as if reading my mind. Then she answered, "I want you to see the truth. The real truth. Sarah's not just your wife. She was involved in this game before you were even married. And Thomas, he was just part of the scenario." I put my head down, trying to understand how it all fit together. I remember when I met Sarah. I remember how she was always there for me, supporting me in everything. And suddenly all these years I spent building a family started to lose meaning. Everything I thought was stable seemed fake. "You have a choice," Lisa said it again, and I realized she wasn't joking. "You can continue living as before, pretend that nothing has changed. Or you can destroy everything you know and try to find the truth." These words seemed to hit me. I wasn't ready for betrayal, but everything around me was a betrayal. What have I been doing all this time? What will I do next? "Why didn't you stop all this earlier?" I asked, my voice fierce. Lisa didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, as if wondering whether to continue. "Because you have to find out the truth yourself," she replied after a pause. "We've all been your friends, but we can't leave you in the dark anymore. You have to be prepared for anything." The feeling of heaviness in my chest increased. My imagination began to paint pictures, and every moment seemed like a piece of a puzzle that I had never put together. Everything I thought I knew was really just a veil of lies. "What should I do?" I asked because I couldn't keep it in any longer. Lisa took a step toward me, handed me an envelope that I hadn't noticed at first. It was a document, my last chance to understand everything to the end. "That's the answer," she said quietly. "But remember, what you find out could change your life forever." I took the envelope and tore it open. What I saw on the first page made me freeze. It was a document that confirmed everything I had feared. Sarah was not just a victim of this scenario, she was its co-author. And our whole story was just part of a bigger scheme that I didn't fully understand. But none of the options were easy. What now? My family was just a pawn in this game, and I had to make a choice. Would I be a part of this game until the end, or was I ready to break it off once and for all? I was sitting on the couch, holding that document in my hands. My heart was beating faster than usual. I replayed in my mind all the moments when something didn't add up, when I felt that something was wrong, but I couldn't ask the right question. Everything looked like I was just a tool in the hands of others, and I didn't even realize it. But now everything made sense. Sarah, with whom I was building my life, was part of a game I didn't understand. And Thomas, my closest colleague, turned out to be more than just a friend. All these years, I believed in something that was actually false. She was not the person I had imagined her to be. And even more, she probably wasn't the person she thought she was either. Lisa was sitting in front of me, watching my every move. I couldn't understand why she was here. Why didn't she leave when it was over? Why was she so obviously pulling me toward a truth I didn't want to know? "Now you understand," Lisa said, her voice calm but still cold. "It was all part of a bigger scheme, but it's not the end point. Now you have to make your own choice." I looked at her, feeling my hands tremble with tension. I didn't know what to do, but I felt that the moment when I could sit quietly had already passed. I couldn't just forget everything I had learned. I couldn't just go back to my old life, to my family, to Sarah, who was really a part of it all. I looked up, trying to figure out what to do next. What should I do with this knowledge? I asked, even though I already knew there was no easy answer. Lisa smiled, but it was a hollow smile. "You have two options," she started slowly. "The first is to compromise, to continue living in this world and realize that you are not the only circle in this game. You can become a part of what is happening, whether publicly or covertly." My hands fell to my knees. I could feel the heaviness in my chest becoming more and more palpable. "The second option?" "And the second option," she paused, giving me time to think, "is to break out of this circle. Break all ties, destroy what has been built, and find a new path. It will be hard and you will lose a lot, but at least you will be free." These two options, it was a difficult decision. Only I could determine what to do with them. Only I could decide whether to continue to be part of this game or try to leave it, not knowing what awaits outside this circle. I looked at Lisa, picking up that document again. My fingers clenched it, but my mind could not find a clear answer. There was too much to lose, too much that was valuable to be affected. And worst of all, it was not an easy choice. Every day, with every fact revealed, I felt like I was sinking deeper into a hole from which I might never get out. Lisa looked at me with one last smile and, when she saw that I still couldn't make a decision, she quietly stood up. "You're going to move on anyway," she said, picking up her things. "No matter what you decide, it's not your choice anymore." I sat there in complete silence and felt the world around me slowly falling apart. All my beliefs, all my thoughts, everything I thought was true was crumbling into small pieces. But this was only the beginning. What I would do would determine whether I would remain the person I was before or change beyond recognition. I looked down at the document and read it a second time. Did I have a chance to change anything? Did I have a chance to choose a different path? Or was it too late? I sat looking at that document, but I could no longer see the words. All the thoughts, all the emotions I had experienced seemed to be tangled into one big, vague feeling. Every moment my hand reached for the phone, but I stopped. I had nothing to say to Sarah. I didn't know where to start, how to tell her about it, how to explain that we were both part of something bigger, something we couldn't control, something that not only destroyed us, but also made us part of a game in which the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. I could feel my heart beating faster as I remembered her face, her smile, her warmth. How could I not have noticed what was now so obvious? How could I not realize that she was not just my wife, but also part of this whole conspiracy? I knew that I couldn't go back, but I was even more afraid of what I would do next. Inside, I fought with myself. Lisa was right. I could have left everything as it was, stayed in the game, submitted to this world where everything was organized according to different rules. But what did that mean for me? What did I have to sacrifice by staying put? I took a deep breath as I put the document on the table. I knew now that I lacked the strength to make a decision. I was afraid to decide because I knew that no choice would be easy. Almost simultaneously, the thought occurred to me, what if this is not the end? What if this is just the beginning? What if everything I had done up to that point was just a part of something much bigger and darker? Couldn't be sure. What if what I had learned was only halfway there? Lisa seemed to read my mind. She looked around the room where we were sitting and said quietly, "Remember that what you choose is not just your choice. It is something that will affect everything. Your future, your place in this world. Are you ready for it?" Her words echoed in my head. It wasn't just a promise, it was a warning. There was something in her voice that I couldn't quite make out, as if she knew more than I did. My mind kept spinning. I didn't have the strength to answer right away. I looked at the darkness outside the window and did not know what to do. I closed my eyes and imagined Sarah. What will I say to her when I meet her? How can I live with what I've learned? If I continue, I will lose her, my reputation, and probably more, my everyday life. And although we no longer kept in touch, sometimes I would think about how she was doing now, what had happened to her. I didn't want an answer, and yet my curiosity sometimes made me want to know more. But I was glad that I left this question unanswered. Life went on, and I started meeting new people, new friends. All my connections now became easier and more open, and I was not afraid to show my vulnerability to those around me. I learned to appreciate people for who they really are, without being tested or deceived. One day, after several years, I received another letter from her. The letter was short and dry, but this time it didn't arouse any emotions in me. She wrote that she had realized how much she had lost, that she had been looking for something in others that she could not find in herself. She apologized, but I didn't feel the need to respond. It was the moment when I finally realized that I was no longer tied to the past. I wasn't looking for recovery. I wasn't trying to figure out all the details. It was a confirmation for me that my life is not limited to the few years I spent in a toxic situation. My emotions were no longer in the hands of others. I was the one who decided what to do. Instead, I began to actively engage in things that I had once neglected. I rediscovered my old hobbies, started new projects, and took on things that had seemed less important before, but now gave me real pleasure. I was free from my own internal limitations. One day I met someone new, an interesting woman named Jane. She was different from all the others. There was no hint in her eyes that she could betray or manipulate. She was a simple, sincere person with whom you could share your thoughts and build the future together. At that moment, I realized that time heals. I had no desire to compare her to the past, because it was not fair to her or to me. We started a new chapter in our lives together. It wasn't perfect, but we tried to build a relationship based on trust and openness. And although difficulties arose from time to time, I realized that true strength lies not in avoiding problems, but in finding ways to overcome them together. I realized that true recovery does not come after you find a replacement, but when you learn to forgive yourself and move forward. Everything I went through and all the mistakes I made became part of my personal history. And that was the moment when I felt the real inner peace I had been looking for a long time. Now, when I look back, I have no regrets about what happened, because it all shaped me into the person I am today. I have become stronger, wiser, And although that past will never disappear, it no longer determines my future. And although I should have felt some kind of relief or betrayal when I finally let it all go, I no longer felt the heaviness that had haunted me before. In fact, time began to be perceived in a new way, not as an endless stream pulling me back into the past, but as a chance to create something new, regardless of what came before. In each new day, I learned to find joy in small moments and not to dwell on what had already been lost. I was able to see people and situations without blinders on, and this allowed me to build relationships without illusions or expectations. Jane was a kind of restoration for me, not only because of what she brought to my life, but also because she helped me to restore my faith in healthy relationships. She wasn't perfect, but she didn't want to be. She was just herself, and that was enough. We started planning our future together. Joint trips, evenings where there was no room for secrets or lies, and at the same time we opened up new aspects of life to each other. I noticed how I started to trust again, even though I was still cautious. And it was this cautious trust that was the key to our stable relationship. Instead of falling back into illusions, we built our bond gradually, with understanding and acceptance of mistakes. I came to the conclusion that in order to be happy, you don't need to try to erase the past or reject it. Every moment, every experience, even the most painful ones, left behind certain lessons that should be understood. Betrayed hopes, losses, but also new opportunities, new people and new perspectives. All of this has become part of who I am. As the months went by, I realized more and more that letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means living with it, accepting it, and moving on. And with each new step, I felt that my heart was no longer burdened with hatred or resentment. Just when I thought I had finally achieved the peace I needed, something happened that made me reconsider all my views on relationships once again. It wasn't any treacherous manipulation or undeserved punishment. No, this time, I myself became a participant in an unexpected situation that forced me to make a difficult choice. Although I was already able to accept all the mistakes of the past, I realized that this new challenge was an important moment for my personal growth. Now I had a real chance to finally free myself from everything that was pulling me back and take this journey to another level. Nevertheless, my new life, which seemed so stable and on the right track, suddenly shook again. I was at work when I received a call. The number was unknown, but my intuition told me it was important. I picked up the phone. "Hi, it's Lisa." Her voice sounded incredibly calm, as if she hadn't disappeared from my life in the past few months. "I need to talk to you." Time seemed to have stopped. It was Lisa, my ex-wife, the same Lisa who had betrayed me with her boss, the same one whose betrayal had killed any hope of happiness. Feelings of alienation and surprise overwhelmed me, but I couldn't stop myself. I didn't answer right away, but waited to see what she wanted. "Are you okay?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. "I know I made a mistake, and I really don't think you can forgive me, but there's something I have to tell you." I felt my heart start to beat faster, but I didn't want to be manipulated by her again. However, I decided to listen to her anyway. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe not, but at that moment, I had to hear her. "I'm pregnant, Max." Her words sounded cold and direct. I'll get it out again, but it's not your baby." I didn't know what to say, what to do. All my thoughts stopped for a second. Imagine a situation where you were betrayed, felt deceived, and then found out that the betrayal was actually not just about infidelity, but also about a child who had nothing to do with you. "Max, I know I have no right to ask for this, but I need you to see me again. I need an apology for myself. is not for you. It's for me." Her words sounded ruthless, but I still couldn't figure out how to react. "Lisa, this can't be true," I replied, although I didn't know whether I was shocked by her words again or whether I had already experienced something that my heart was no longer capable of feeling. "But it's true, and I'm ready to do anything to help you build a normal relationship again. I know that you may hate me, but I'm ready to prove that all this happened because of my mistakes." I sat down at the table, swallowing my anger and bitterness. It was the same thing again. She was still trying to control the situation by manipulating my feelings. And yet I realized that now that she was trying to get back into my life, it was no longer just a conversation about us. She didn't come back for us. She came back for herself. I made a choice, and I did not choose forgiveness. I realized that after everything that had happened, there could be no more chances. All my attempts to understand why she cheated, all my attempts to return to a normal relationship, all of it was in vain. Her coming back to me was just an attempt to restore something that could no longer be restored, and I couldn't let her control my life again. "Lisa," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though a storm was raging inside me, "you destroyed everything we had. You can't just come back and ask for forgiveness. You want forgiveness for yourself, but I can't be a part of this anymore." The silence on the other end of the line was hard. I was waiting for her to say something, to find another way to manipulate me, but it didn't happen. And I realized that she knew it too. There was nothing more between us. "Okay." Her voice became quiet, almost ruthless. "I understand." These words, these last words with which she ended our conversation, were the end. The end of our story, and I was relieved, albeit with a bitter taste in my heart. We never spoke again, and although I felt like I had lost a part of myself in this story, I realized that I no longer had a choice but to move forward. There was no more room for Lisa in my life, and I accepted that. Now I live my own life. I no longer have a desire to reach back to that pain, to those mistakes. I have accepted that sometimes lost moments cannot be returned. And although I no longer have what I once thought would be my happiness, I realize that true happiness is something that can be created again, from scratch. And Liza, she remained in the past, just as I remembered her. A woman who betrayed me, but also a woman who taught me a lesson I will never forget.